How many of you are swimmers? Raise your hands. You love to swim, all right? Not a lot, but some. You probably like going to the beach more than you like swimming. How many of you are Speedo wearers? Let's just get that out in the open. We're starting a new series called Shallow, Middle, Deep. And we're going to be talking about how, like in a pool, there's the shallow end where the kids hang out with their floaties on their arms, and the parents are nervously watching them to make sure they don't go out any further, to the middle part of the pool, which older kids will go to, or adults, and it will be about waist deep, to the deep end where the diving boards are, and it goes very, very deep. And we're going to be talking about in this series how our relationship with God is a lot like that. Our relationship with God is a lot like a pool where we get to make a decision where we're going to spend our time, whether we're going to be content being in the shallow end with spiritual infancy as our main goal and our contentment, the middle part of the pool, or the deep end. Now, what my calling was to come here and to start a new church with people who weren't Christians, and to start 20 campuses all throughout the Philadelphia metro area. And it's been a joy to serve in that capacity and to serve with you, to watch God bring that into fruition one piece at a time. Now, the other part of that is I made a lifelong commitment to this church. So I'm not putting my resumes out, even though I get lots of people that will ask, hey, can you come and be the pastor of our church? As you would expect, someone with my good looks, it is hard. It is hard. A modeling career of pastor, I struggle with it. So hopefully you know I'm joking. Those of you new, the brand new people are like, who is this? He's an idiot. What is this? So my commitment here as a church is the long play. It is some of you are still going to be alive when you're there at my retirement party. So as someone who's going to be here a long time, I'm way more interested in the development of people than in flashes in the pan. Like, I kid you not, no doubt our church could be 2 to 3 to 4 times the size if we were going for the short play, for the buzz, the excitement, all those sorts of things. I'm way more interested in how each of us are developing as Christ followers and growing in that and seeing what God is doing in your life. That said, what I love about making a lifelong commitment to this church, first and foremost, is watching our kids grow up. I just love doing that. See, when you go around at one church and then you're at another church and you're at another church, whether you're a pastor, whether you're a member of that church, you miss that. The kids that were born when we started the church are now sophomores and juniors in high school. And I've watched them grow and I've watched them develop. Many of you had kids that were older than that when you came in, and we've watched them go on and graduate high school, then to college. Some of them are now married. Some of them have kids. I've watched you get married. I've watched you grow. I've watched you retire. It's one of the joys of being a pastor, is just watching God at work in everyone's life. The other thing that I really love about being involved in a church in a long time is the deep bonds with people. Really getting to know people, really getting to know and watch how God is working in their lives. But some will ask, what's the downside of staying at a church for a long period of time? And I think there are a couple easy ones. One, you get to watch me in my fluctuation of weight gain and weight loss. So that's been a joy. That's been a joy, knowing you're sitting there, oh, he's losing weight again. That's great, all right? Give it a year, okay? Give it a year, right? Some of you have been watching my hairline recede for a long time, and I would like to say there are many of you who are way past me. Look at the bald-headed people in the room. The real difficult thing about pastoring a church for a long period of time is not watching people flame out and stop coming. That is excruciating. What is the most difficult thing about being at a church for a long period of time is this: watching people who used to be radically committed to Christ and sold out, passionate followers of Jesus, who are now just going through the motions. still here, but instead of the deep end that used to define their life, they're now content with their spiritual life in the shallows. The spiritual infancy that they had 10 years ago, that they left behind, is now what they're content with. They're no longer passionate about their faith, no longer passionate about serving, evangelizing, impacting their family and friends. 1 month, they're at a mission trip, building a house. The next month, they're thinking to themselves, you know what? Let's stay home and watch Joel Osteen. Our mission as a church is to help people far from God become fully devoted followers and stay fully devoted followers. So if the Christian life is like a pool, there are people who have gone into the deep end who are reverting back. And as Jesus said in Revelation chapter 3, I know your deeds are neither hot nor cold. I wish you were one or the other. Here's my question. How does your faith and your spiritual excitement and passion right now compare to where you were 3 years ago? Now, let me first say, for those of you who aren't Christians, and I know there are a lot of you here, welcome, we're glad you're here. For you, it hasn't changed much, except maybe you have a little more spiritual interest. But for those of you who are Christians, who have already committed your lives to becoming more and more like Jesus, how do you compare to where you were 3 years ago? Be honest. Where were you 3 years ago, and where are you now? See, here's the scary thing. If you're in the deep end today, all you have to do is nothing, and eventually you will gravitate back towards the shallow end. And the question is, why does that happen? And the answer is this. I want you to write this down. Take a pen and in your sermon notes and write this down. And it's this phrase: what goes up must come down. Really profound theological statement. What goes up must come down. Now, let me give you an example of this. So a few years ago, my family and I decided we were going to go out to Lancaster in that area, and we were going to go to Dutch Wonderland, right? Dutch Wonderland. You ever been to Dutch Wonderland? Dutch Wonderland, right? Where the little kids can play on the games and parents can endlessly watch them all day long. So the kids were like, we want to go there, and I said, the only way we're going to do that is we're going to do something historical, just like my dad used to do with us. You want to go to Disney? Great, but you're going to have to go through 18 Civil War battlefields to get there. So I decided we were going to go to the Ephrata Cloister. Now, I call it Ephrata the way it's supposed to be pronounced, right? But for you, so you'll know what it is, we'll call it Ephrata. We went to the Ephrata Cloister, and a cloister simply is where a group of people will live together, where you're cloistered together, living together, eating, sleeping, and working together under the same roof. Now, in Ephrata, or Ephrata, as you people call it, there was a cloister that was started in the 1700s by a guy that came from Germany named Conrad Beissler. And it was a Protestant group, and they were celibate, they weren't married, and they said, we'll be a cloister together, and we'll work together. And their heyday was in the 1700s, and it really lasted about 15 years. And wonder why? Celibate people living together in a house. Why didn't that catch on like wildfire? But they did. They wore these white outfits, and they lived in a crazy monastic fashion. Now, our family did this tour, and we learned their daily routine went something like this. They got up at 5 a.m. to pray, and then they went to work, and then at 9 a.m., what do you think they did at 9 a.m.? They got together to pray, right? And then they went back to work, and then at noon, they got together again to do what? To pray, okay? And then they worked until 5 o'clock, and then they got together to do what? No, they didn't pray. They were the people that created the game Capture the Flag. And so they would run to, actually that's a joke, they didn't play Capture the Flag, but they got together to eat, right? I thought, okay, this is a boring story, how do I liven it up? Anyway, so they got together at 5 o'clock, and then they ate, but they only ate vegetables. Strict vegetable diet. And then after that, they had classes in the evening. And then they went to bed at 9 o'clock and slept, and this is one of their beds, And these are wooden pillows, right? Why aren't we growing? I don't know. Maybe we're sleeping on wooden pillows, right? And the thing is, this place took off like a rocket, and then it fizzled out and eventually became a church. And one of the last members of that church, it eventually just became a Protestant church, died just a few years ago. Now, as a kid, I used to think that when I grew up in church and I was watching people, I would watch people become Christians, and they would be so excited. Like, we're going to do this, yeah. And then, like, I would never see them again. Like, what happened? And it scared me when I became a Christian because I didn't want to be a flash in the pan. I didn't want to be a hypocrite. I didn't want to be like a lot of people that I saw. And I didn't realize that this was normal because, as we said, what goes up must come down. Then in the early church, we see this. The early church took off, bam, a huge explosion. Acts chapter 2, verse 42 says, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who would need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. Every day. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all of the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. Huge start, explosive start. 35 years later, after this happened, an unknown writer whose book was included in the New Testament, a man or a woman, we don't know who the writer was, wrote a book called the Book of Hebrews. Many people think it was Paul or someone in his band, wrote a book to the Book of Hebrews to Christians, and this writer said in Hebrews 10:24, let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together. Look at this. As some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. What happened? They were meeting every day. They were nuts. They were into it. We're going. Let's go. We're going to follow Jesus. And then 35 years later, people were like, we'll catch it online. How does that happen? Here's the question I want to ask. Did God know this was going to happen then? And more importantly, does God know it's going to happen to us? So I'm thinking about this and I'm praying about this as I was going to present this passage, and then I remembered this old theory called from economics class. Organizational theorists have this model that they use. It's called the Sigmoid Curve. Now pull out your pens and your paper. I want you to draw this. I want you to draw a sigmoid curve. All right? So a sigmoid curve basically has a beginning and it has an end. All people, organizations, institutions, churches, whatever, have a beginning and they have an end. And so what happens is that when you become a Christian, you have a starting point. And you say, I want to follow Christ. And you start out with a bang, and you're super excited, and you're ready to follow Christ. Some of you decided you were going to get married. You were here. You had a big wedding day. How much did you spend on your wedding? You got the dress, and you got the tuxes, and the pictures, and it was just this huge, huge thing. Some of you started businesses, and you had your grand opening, and everybody came, and you're excited, and you did the marketing and that sort of thing. Some schools started. They had the grand opening of the school. Some countries started, like South Sudan recently, started with a bang, we're going to do this. And just like all people and just like all organizations, they start with a bang, and the sigmoid curve says, what goes up, what? Must come down. Some of you got married, and on your big day, you were so excited. You dreamed about the future. She came down the aisle. You looked at her. You had your wedding night. That was a highlight. And then the very next day, it went down. You're like, this is hard work. I thought every day was going to be like this. I thought every day people were going to give us gifts and we're going to feel these warm feelings, and we don't feel these warm feelings anymore. What happened? What's wrong with us? Nothing's wrong with you. It's called life. What went up goes down. And just like every marriage, just like every person that becomes a Christian, just like every church, every company, every country, you have to make a decision right here whether you are going to pay the price to go up. Right? See, some of you in your marriages right now, you were here, then you were here, and now you're here. And God is saying, listen, if you're going to continue to grow in your marriage, there are some things you need to address. He's got some stuff he needs to fix. You've got some stuff you need to fix. You need to fix it. But if you can you bring the next picture up? Some of you refuse to do this at all. And so what happens is, at this point when you knew you needed to change, you didn't, and your marriage started to go down. Communication issues, addictions, debt, money, spending, childcare, sex, intimacy, the whole shooting match. Those things should have been addressed here, but now you're here and you're wondering, what the heck are we going to do now? Because you didn't address them when you did. Why? Because what goes up, what? Must come down. Now, we see this in businesses. Remember Krispy Kreme? Remember when Krispy Kreme came out? Remember we were on vacation one time. Flew in, got to the airport, went to our location where we were staying at the hotel. And I was a little hungry. And I was like, I don't know what you guys want. I know what I want. Krispy Kremes. And so we went around for 30 minutes looking for a stupid Krispy Kreme place with the hot light lamp on. Remember the lamp? Right? They're freshly made. And we saw one. And I was like, hallelujah, right? And people were crazy years ago for Krispy Kremes. How many of you woke up this morning thinking, I got to go to Krispy Kremes? None of you did. Why? Because what goes up must come down. Now, some companies will say, we have got to go through the hard work, and before we start petering down, companies like Starbucks start inventing with food, different kinds of drinks, different kinds of locations, where at this point, the secret to continued growth is before you go down, you have to start something new. That's the secret to marriage. Before you start going down, at the point where you know you can address the issues, you start something new. As a church, when you know you can still address the issues, you hire a children's pastor, or start a campus, or do a facelift, or get people into groups, or all the whole host of things that we're doing behind the scenes, or we continue to do. Or we will eventually die just like everybody else. The key to continued growth is up, down, but before you go down, you start something new. How does that apply to us as Christians? Here. Romans 12:11 says, never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Keep your spiritual fervor, it's going to die. When you see it go down, you need to do something before it goes all the way down. My question to everyone in this room is, what is the new thing God is calling you to do to continue to grow as a Christian? What is the new thing? Our first instinct is to go back and do the thing that produced this amazing spiritual experience we had way back in the beginning. We want to go back and replicate that. We want to do that, right? The problem is it can't be done. That small group that you were a part of, that's gone. You can't go back and reassemble that group because you're a new person, they're a new person. You need to start a new thing. That way you were going about reading the Bible that worked for you when you were 25 years old is not going to work for you now. You need to start a new thing. The relationships, the way you express your faith, it needs a new thing. See, Christians will come here all the time, usually from other states, and they'll try to recreate their previous church experience. Some guy will come up to me from Indiana or Long Island or Florida and say, "Can you make the music like it was where I'm from? Can you talk about the things that we used to talk about at the previous church? I miss the people who were at my old church because they were blank." I got bad news for you. You're not in Florida anymore. I got good news for you. You're not on Long Island anymore. You're a new person. You need to move on because God is doing a new thing in your life. I'll see Christians all the time. They'll be in their 70s, and they'll talk about the good old days when God was really using them in their life, and they were doing this and they were doing that, thinking that the most important, significant things in their life are over. Bull. The most important thing God is calling you has not been done yet in your life. You didn't reach this point like this is it and everything else is downhill. You need to start a new thing in your life. You stay in the deep end and do nothing, you will eventually gravitate back to the shallows. When Christians lose their passion for the things of God, they long for that conference, that camp, that small group, that certain kind of music, that church they attended, that special pastor, that place they lived that they loved, that time in their life when God was so real to them, that circle of friends where they used to be. And God is saying to all of us, stop living in the past. Be thankful for what God did in your life. Now move on. It's time to start a new thing in your life. I love what the prophet Isaiah, speaking through God to the people at their time and to us, is this. See, I am doing a new thing. Do you not perceive it? See, a lot of us, we're like waiting for something to happen, and God is doing it and calling us to do it. And we're like, what are you doing, God? This church sucks. I've lost my excitement for you. I'm depressed. What am I going to do now? I'm just going to lull myself into sleep and become like all of my other non-Christian friends. Blue, blue, blue. And God's like, you don't even see what I'm doing. My gosh, you're 58 years old, and I put all of this time and effort into you, God says. Don't you see what I'm going to do through you now? But you keep going back to the shallow end. I'm doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? Look at this beautiful image. I'm making a way in the wilderness where there's no road. Streams bubbling up in the wasteland, and a lot of us feel like that right now. We're dry as a bone, and God's like, I'm going to do something new in your life. My Spirit's going to breathe into your life, and you're going to do something new. And so that's what we're going to talk about in this series. And so what I would like for you to do this morning, I want you to bow your heads, and we're going to pray one simple prayer, okay? So let's do that. I know some of you rebels, you're not going to bow your heads right now, so you're just going to stare at my head, my bald spot. So here's what we're going to do. I want you to bow your heads, and we're going to pray. It's this. God, here I am. Do something new in my life. God, here we are. Do something new in our lives. Like water that can't be found in the middle of the desert, cause it to spring up. Like the clear path that emerges in the middle of a forest, let it emerge. Help us to celebrate what you've done in the past. But God, give birth in us a vision and a desire and a passion to see that new thing and to live in it. We pray that in Jesus' name. Amen.